So for corn, Allendale survey found a 178.28 nationwide yield for corn across the board. And this results in a production of 14.980 billion bushels. Now, USDA last month was at 181.83 for the whole US, and they have a production of 15.278. So Allendale survey found a total corn decline of 298 million bushels. So this does represent a moderate decline and a note of some concern here. Now, as far as a breakdown by state, we are recognizing problems with Iowa. In fact, the Allendale survey suggested a 185 bushel per acre yield for Iowa. And that's actually down, in this case, by 17 bushels per acre for the whole state versus USDA's last month report. So lower numbers for number one state for Iowa, 17 bushels. For Illinois, we have a decline of 4 bushels from last month to now 203. And the number 3 corn state for Nebraska, that one declining slightly by about 2 bushels per acre to now 189. So the top 3 corn states having declines. Let's look at some other states as well, which is important to note. One thing to note as far as better than expected production, we did find that South Dakota, at least on the corn end, they did tell us that they've got a very good crop still. 4 bushels over last month to now 171. Also a strong crop here, Minnesota. And that's been one thing which a lot of people had questioned whether the crop is really as good as they say up there. And the survey suggested it was 202 bushels an acre, which is up 5 from last month. And let's look over at Indiana, which is still a very important corn producer. They actually gave us a very strong yield number, 192 for that state, and that's up 4 from the previous month. And we are recognizing some problems like noted across the board, Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, but some of these issues are, according to our survey, being balanced out by some other states of note. So as far as our discussion on this discussion as far as the production decline, 298 million bushels for the whole U.S., and certainly we'll have a lot of discussions about the state of Iowa. And I want us to first center in on the main chart on the screen. So we analyze each state, and we actually analyze them both for each state, how it's doing, as well as historically. And if we look at this chart, this one shows the survey, what the producers told us regarding yields on the bottom axis. So you see here, this goes from 50 bushels all the way up in this case to 300 bushels per acre as far as the range. And we also analyze, well, what percentage of producers had given us yield numbers for each specific yield. And for this year's discussion, this is shown by this red line right here. And we can compare the red line versus the previous 2 years, 2019 and 2018. For Iowa specifically, of course, this removes the discussion about harvested acres from last year. Now, as far as the numbers, you'll notice, well, this year's yield numbers were lower and were shifted to the left, of course, compared with the previous 2 years. So this does back up the discussion point that we do have some yield problems here this year. Now I'm going to make one interesting point here as far as our discussion with Iowa. Well, if you look at this red line, which is this year's yield surveys that we received from producers, you'll notice it's very close to a blue line here, which is 2017. Now let's look here first of all for the Iowa discussion point in this lower left-hand corner, this lower left-hand box. And I wanted to show you the math of how these numbers are not showing a dramatic break in terms of a total discussion point for Iowa. Well, for the survey, we did not include any acreage, harvested acreage adjustment. We feel you might be looking at maybe 500,000 acres as far as insurance claims for 0 bushels per acre, and that might perhaps break this down by maybe an extra 100 million bushels. But I want you to take a look at the yield discussion here, 202 down here to this 185. So we have a full 17 bushel per acre drop for the entire state of Iowa, all averaged out. In this case, this does not give us a major decline in terms of a total production concern here. So we do have Iowa recognized with some serious concerns, a whole 227.7 million bushel decline here. And this does have to be recognized. But at this point in time, we can't find a discussion point for saying there's a major nationwide problem caused from this issue. And like I said, maybe on the harvested acres end, we can certainly take off 500,000 acres, That might be a discussion point here for us, but not something that's going to be a major concerning point. Now, here's USDA's numbers in the box here to the bottom right, because I want you to show some of the weaknesses of doing yield estimates here in the month of August, which we have to recognize is an important concern. Let's look at 2019 as far as the August change, September 191, so no change there. By the time it got to January, though, there was a full 7 bushel difference. In 2018, we had 202 in August, 206 for Iowa in September, and it dropped all the way down to 196 by the January report. Here's something very, very interesting. 2017, if you look at the crop ratings, well, crop ratings were kind of low compared with these other years in 2017. And also you notice our surveys shown in the blue line, they were kind of low at that time. Look what happened to yields, 188 in August, 187 in September, but then they cranked up in October, another 4 bushels, another 6 bushels on top of that in November, and then look here at January, another 5 bushels off of that. So the comparison between USDA's viewpoint of yields in August of 188 and then January of 202, a very, very clear difference. So I want to point out that as far as making estimates of yields in the month of August, no matter what method is, whether it's a crop tour or in this case a nationwide producer survey, this is simply a snapshot into a window of time. It still does not take into consideration some of the other factors past August weather. So this is an issue which a lot of us might say, well, with dryness developing and continuing in the month of September, will that mean we've got some declines then? It certainly could. On the other hand, the general history from recent years is for a rebound in yields as we go from August to final. So the main message of this chart or this slide is, number one, obviously we are seeing some problems with Iowa. They were recognized. Number two, don't be locked into the viewpoint that this yield discussion is all done. It is not. We really won't know these numbers until we actually get into the fields. Now, as far as our discussion point here for our next discussion point here, and this is going to be a slide here which looks at USDA corn yield history. And in this case, I want to show you guys, as far as a 10-year history, what happens to yields. So we have our February numbers at USDA's Ag Conference. In May through July, they take trend yield and maybe adjust it according to planting progress, maybe significant weather events, but usually nothing major. And then August on out is when we have some type of actual either producer survey methods. We also have discussion points about the USDA in-field objective yield checks. And we have USDA, which uses some satellite imagery as well to help fine-tune their numbers. Now, for the month of August, this is only a producer survey. For the month of September, this is going to be mixed with a producer survey as well as some in-field checks here. So keep in mind these numbers will change. And I just want to give you guys some numbers to work with as we point out that all of these numbers from August to the final, you are looking at some moderate changes. So I just want you to understand these numbers are not locked in here in August. These numbers are not locked in September. And gosh darn, we won't really know until we actually get the fields, get in the fields here as far as these general numbers. Now, as far as our next discussion point here with the survey itself, we certainly pride ourselves in what we suggest is a very strong statistical survey with a high degree of accuracy, especially for corn. Over the past 10 years, our error rate compared with USDA September report, it averages out to only about 1.1%. So for the corn numbers, these are very strong survey numbers to look at. So keep in mind for corn, this is a very strong survey overall. Now, another thing I will point out here, if you notice the bolded numbers, this is Allendale's number versus USDA. In most of these cases, in fact, in 9 of the past 10 years, our survey undercounts corn yields. I'm going to say that again so we understand. In 9 of the past 10 years, our survey has slightly undercounted corn yields versus USDA September report. So keep that in mind as well. Now, as far as soybeans, the yield discussion here, 51.93 bushels per acre. and this is down from USDA's 53.3. Now, as far as production-wise, we can certainly argue that as far as the decline here, 4.311 billion bushels, USDA last month was 4.425. So as far as the soybean numbers, we have about a 114 million bushel decline compared with USDA's numbers in August. And as far as key yield states, well, we do have Iowa dropping by 5 bushels an acre, Illinois dropping by 3. We have, of course, declines here for Nebraska. Look at our number there, 53 bushels an acre. That's actually a full 9 bushels under USDA's August number. Of course, declines here for Kansas with this dryness which is developing. One thing which is a little different is on the South Dakota discussion, we did have higher corn yields, but here for the soybean side, a full 5 bushel drop. So keep that in mind there as well. And interesting to point out, Minnesota actually unchanged versus USDA overall. So overall on the soybean side, roughly the same type of story. And we can argue that this dryness, I think, which is continuing through September, that will probably be an issue shown on the October report. But for the very short term, we're not quite sure it's going to be a big drop for us on the September report. Now, as far as accuracy on the soybean side, well, for the most part, for the soybean side, this is as best as you're going to get. The hardest issue with making yield determinations is in August is really with, and no matter what method you're looking at, crop tours or producer surveys in this case, the numbers are not as strong. The error rate here is about 3.4% versus USDA's September report, and that's averaged out over the past 10 years. Also interesting as far as Allendale survey, in each of the past 10 years, our survey has undercounted, meaning we've been too low versus USDA's September report. So I noted before on the corn side, we've been lower than USDA's September number in 9 of the past 10 years. Here we are with soybeans, we've been lower than USDA in each of the past 10 years. In most cases, not dramatically so, but just keep that in mind as we have our discussions about these numbers past this point. And just like we had the discussion about the corn yield discussion, well, as far as August versus final, the same type of discussion here is true for soybeans. We've been lucky to point out in the past 3 years here, we haven't had any major changes. 2017 through 2019, the change from August to the final was not that dramatic. But we do have some other years in the years before this, where you have seen, a good 3 or 4 bushel change. So keep in mind on the soybean end, there certainly is still room to move up or down. And same thing with corn. We really don't know these numbers until we actually get out in the fields. Now, we also asked producers about how much they sold. And this is actually a very interesting discussion, which is quite important, especially at this time of year. And as far as these numbers on the sold pace, well, as far as old crop sales, they told us they're roughly about 95% sold, which is actually a little better than last year and certainly much better than 2 years ago. So on the positive side, we do have a lot of old crop moved out. I was actually a little surprised about the new crop numbers, 24% sold. That actually fits in line with the previous 2 years. I had maybe assumed that we might have a little problems as far as new crop sales rates, but really as far as this goes, it would appear that producers caught up on some low sales in recent weeks on this low rally we've had in terms of grain markets. So as far as corn, our sales rate is roughly where it has been in most part in normal years. As far as the soybean discussion, 96% sold for the current old crop sales rate, and this is actually relatively strong. And I think our movement on futures past $9 certainly got a lot of crop moved in the past few weeks. Of course, the discussion here on new crop, as it stands, about 28% sold on new crop, and this is a little better than last year's quite low number of 16. So as far as the soybean numbers, we're maybe a little behind, but probably not that dramatic. And I would probably estimate that with our current rebound in price, which has moved past the ending of our survey, which was on the 28th, we're probably going to certainly catch up on any lost sales here for soybeans. Over on the wheat numbers, interesting to see we're only about 21% sold as far as the currently harvested crop on wheat. And this is actually down from the previous 2 years of 27 and 36%. Now, as far as our last point of discussion, I'm just going to simply verbally discuss the maturity issue, because this is not as dramatic as it has been, obviously, with last year's concern. Looking at maturity by state on the corn end, producers in North Dakota told us October 1st. South Dakota, it would be September 27th. Minnesota, which planted early this year, they tell us they'll be mature as of September 23rd, which is a good 1, 2, 3 weeks ahead of normal for Minnesota. Wisconsin, September 29th. Only state which is maybe sticking out there would be Michigan, which is October 10th. And as far as Iowa, September 19th. So the main discussions here for us right now on the Allendale survey. Well, number one, we are suggesting a moderate decline in supply. I think that's very reasonable, and I think the market does more or less have a good portion that's priced in, but we're not yet showing a major concern as far as a nationwide drop. And a lot of us can argue, well, what about this dryness here in September as we continue this concerning point? I do think that's an issue for us, but we do have to admit that we are past the key point of yield determination. So overall, I think this discussion point for us in this year, we certainly have a crop which is slightly reduced. In our viewpoint, slightly under trend yield now for corn. And as far as the discussion point for supplies here on out, let's monitor these numbers and see how they change. And keep in mind, we have a whole lot of discussion point about the issues with actually finding the true yield discussion here in harvest. So with that in mind, we'll conclude our discussion here for today, and I'll turn it back over to Jeremy.
All right, Rich, thank you very much. Very well put together. We appreciate that. A couple questions for you just to wrap this up, specifically about any surprises in the data that you saw. The question actually asked, were there any exceptional yields in non-Corn Belt states?
As far as states which really stuck out as far as strong yields, I think we can obviously point out the discussion here about Minnesota, which obviously is a key Corn Belt state. As far as other ones which really stuck out, let me look through their list here real quick. Really, as far as the breakdown, we've got Indiana, which did a little better than I expected. That is a key Corn Belt state. Let's go over to Kansas. We had declines over there on the discussion here for Ohio, 168 bushels an acre. That's really not that exciting here as far as a major surprise. So as far as the movements here, the only one which I would really kind of say is a major strong yield state right now would be Missouri. And we had them pegged at 178 bushels an acre. And for our survey, that's of course the best ever. And in fact, it's a good, let me go through the numbers real quick. I want to say, yeah, in fact, 178 for Missouri is probably a good 10 bushels an acre over any previous survey we've had for them as well. And as far as their soybean numbers, 55 bushels an acre. If I remember right, this is probably 2 or 3 bushels over any other survey we've done for Missouri. So for the most part, no main surprises for most of the Corn Belt. I will say certainly Missouri was the best of the group in terms of pushing past trend yield though.
You spent some time laying out the situation in Iowa. Is that what you expected to see from the data, and is that what the market has been talking about in Iowa?
So we had that special slide with that distribution graph, and we actually watched these very carefully because it tells us a story about how many producers have the low yield discussion. And I actually was a little surprised to see that we didn't have a lot of major declines in terms of producers showing very, very poor yields. Obviously, there were some clear concerns about the discussion point for the key problem producers. But the number of people who told us they had less than 100 bushels for a whole farm average, that was very, very minimal. So if there's a surprise, it's not that we had lower yields. I think that was represented, and I do think that's accurate. The surprise for me was that we didn't have a few more producers saying, I've got less than 120 for a whole farm average or 100 bushels for a whole farm average. So that's the main issue for us, is we did not have a whole farm operation say they've got 100 or 0 bushels. They simply had fields which they're going to zero out, but as a whole farm, not a whole
Interesting. Last question for you, Rich. You did mention and you laid out how yields will change over the next few months, and that this number here is just kind of a snapshot in time. What's your best guess, though? I know you said we got to get in the field to really know, but what's your best guess on the way that yields will trend between now and January?
This is going to be a little controversial, and I think a lot of producers are going to argue with me on this very strongly. But so we've done some research in actually the past week or so on looking at years with a dry August. And what we found is since 1970, we've identified a total of 13 years with a dry August. And of those, we excluded 4 because 3 of them actually increased in yield on the September report. And we excluded 1 because I think it was 1983, which had a significant drop in yields of 13 to 16% on the September report itself. So of those 13 dry August years since 1970, we have a group of 9. And in 6 of those, or in now those 9 years, which did drop in September, which I think is valid, and also dropped again, some of those dropped again in October. But here's what's interesting, and this is going to be a surprise for a lot of us. In 6 of those 9 years, yields rebounded by the January report over the September number. So yes, I do think we have a decline on this report, maybe another slight decline in October, but history would actually suggest by the time we actually get in the field, harvest this crop, that we might find a little more than expected. So if I have a crystal ball, let's say 178 for this report in September, maybe 177, 176 and change for October, but don't be surprised if there's a chance we come back in the November and January numbers with maybe a rebound in yield.
Very interesting stuff, Rich. We will definitely stay tuned. For today, though, thank you for your work on the survey. In today's presentation, Rich, very well done. Thanks to all who participated in the survey as well. And of course, to all of you listening in, we appreciate it. Remember, we will continue our coverage of the yield discussion, so please stay in touch. You can reach us at 800-262-7538 or online at www.allendale-inc.com. For now, have a great rest of the day and take care.